Gentlemen, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Prof, I will start with you and just, okay, let me start with you, Mr. Elvis. Coming off the recent presidential election, which saw Basiru Diomaye Faye win with significant youth support, to what we saw in Gabon on April 12th on a Saturday, where the military leader, who in 2023 led a coup that ended, well, some say 60-year dynasty, won with over 90% of the vote. Was the much celebrated youth-led trend evident at all in this instance when you juxtapose the two?
Okay, for me, I believe that life change is constant, and young Africans seem to be tired of leaders who make excuses for why they couldn't develop their countries. And if you agree with me, in the last, if you take records from last year, a lot of last 2 years back, you find out that young Africans are not getting involved because they know that their actions and inactions will determine how Africa will look like. And for me, I always tell people that the highest office in the land is that of the electorate and not of the leaders, because without followers, without electorate, we will not have people elected. So what happened in Gabon had to do with people. The youth there, they know that they need to get involved in determining how the future of their country will look like, and that's what also happened in Senegal. Today we have an elected young president who I was meant to understand. I've not been to Senegal since then, but I was meant to understand that he's given leadership an enviable meaning. And we young Africans, so we communicate. I have friends across Africa. I ask them each time we are having chit chat. I ask them, how's the government of your place, and they always, pour out their mind. So for me, I always believe that charity begins at home. Back in Nigeria, 2023 election, you saw young people came out. There was a wave of young people rooting for a particular candidate.
All right,
so I'm looking forward to
Mr. Elvis, we will break it down a little more, contextualize it, maybe for a few countries, and prominent among them would be Nigeria. But let me bring in the Prof and just ask this, is it real change, though, when we say the youth, they're making bold moves and becoming more invested? Because if you look at what happened in Gabon, what we did is something we've been doing for a long time, recycle. He was a military person who overthrew a sitting government and then changed his uniform and was re-elected with 90% of the vote. Is that really progress in the real term of the word?
Well, I think hopefully it's the change for the better as opposed to the change for the West. The interesting phenomenon for me is that if you look at the social ills on the African continent, namely inequality, poverty, and so on, in the main, they tend to affect young people. And what that does, it's either it makes young people to withdraw from politics because they can see that the old guards don't want to let go of power, or it makes some of them to be more interested in politics because they have realized that they are the future. But also the withdrawal of young people in some situations, I think it poses a threat to a democracy. Because if young people are not involved in politics, it begs the question as to how will democracy be strengthened in the past. But if you look at on the continent or in post-colonial states where political power comes from, it comes from two spaces, namely from the rural section of the population and from urban centers. And most of the older people who have been voting for liberation movements have tended to stay in the rural areas. And we see a paradigm shift now of young people not voting in terms of the history of liberation movements, but voting in relation to what politicians can do for them.
Okay, I'll stay with you, Prof, and just let's look at what worked. I know you're in South Africa, and what happened in South Africa in the last election is a case in point. But let's look at what worked in Senegal. What contributed, rather, to the outcome that we saw there that encouraged more young people to participate in the process? And today we have currently 45-year-old president.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question. My answer is that it's because when you have a younger presidential contender, you are able to pull the crowd because they can see one of their own. And therefore, they will respond on a large scale as opposed to being made to vote for, and I'm not trying to be funny, voting for an older person in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think the older people, yes, some of them, they've laid down their lives for, a continent that we have. They've done this and that. But at some point, they have to let go of power to the younger people. So to answer your question, what made young people in Senegal to respond the way they did on a large scale is because they could see that the presidential contender was one of their own, and therefore they're able to look up to that person as opposed to being made to vote for an older person. So I think having a younger leader can really arouse the interest amongst the youth to vote on a large scale.
Mr. Elvis, let's look at what happened in Nigeria in 2023. Even the blind could see that the young people came out in their number and they participated heavily in that election. Perhaps for some, the result was not what they hoped for. But going by their engagement in the 2023 general elections, talk to us about the issues they prioritized and what that means for our electoral process going forward.
Okay, from what I saw in 2023, I saw young Nigerians taking their destiny in their hands, coming out en masse. Even those that were busy, they came out, they used the social media to campaign, to express how they felt. And for me, every leader that is privileged at the moment, that is putting one officer or the other, should know that there is a large mass of young Nigerians who are tired of incompetence being dressed as a strategy. There's a large mass of young Nigerians who knows that even incompetence dressed as strategy is not acceptable. So ahead of the next elections, and another thing that is key again is because we talked about Senegal, we talked about Gabon. I've been privileged to be an electoral observer in Liberia, and I noticed if we have strong institutions, by strong institutions I'm talking about good electoral umpire, who's not biased, who's very, very transparent, I'm sure there will be a wave of change across the African continent, mostly with Nigeria. Because when young people come out to vote and their vote reflects reality, you find out that in the next election, whoever was elected will sit up. Then most times their vote does not reflect reality. That's where you see voter apathy, and that's why you see people saying that, they've already selected.
Mr. Elvis, you're talking about what we need to do. And of course, everybody would agree that when we have better institutions, things really do work for the better. But I wanted you to highlight the priorities, maybe the central talking point across board, across party, that the young people brought to the fore during the election?
One thing I know that is key is for young people to see themselves as mirror of themselves, not being divided by religion, not being divided by either from being from the north or from the south, not being divided by Christianity or social strata. Because oftentimes the older leaders, those that refuse to leave the seat, will always coming through trying to bring a division of regional politics. They talk about religion, social strata, and all that. But for me, if we see ourselves as one, if we see ourselves as one Nigeria, we are all paid, I think we'll get it right. And that was what happened in the last election. Despite the only hiccup we had was, for me, in my opinion, I believe that we didn't have strong institution, which is the electoral empire. But should that enthusiasm continue, should that campaign continue, I think Nigeria will get it right.
All right, Prof, let's circle back to you and talk about what happened in Kenya. The youths held that country to ransom, some would say in a positive way, because that youth-led protest forced politicians to reconsider policies. We saw this in real time. There was a shift to more accountability and issue-based politics in Kenya, and people celebrated that. Talk to us about what drove that activism and if the momentum continues now since then.
I think what
yes, I think it has.
drove that.
Okay, the question is actually for Prof, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think the response of the young people was informed by the government breaking the social contract, right? So what they were doing, they were taking back popular sovereignty, which is their independence. We must remember, democracy is nothing else but government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Therefore, any government of the day has to carry the mandate of its people. And if that government breaks the social contract, therefore people have a right to demand for a change, as long as the government is willing to listen, then it is able to stay in power. So I think that is the rationale behind what we saw. But also we have seen that before in terms of the Arab Spring. It was driven also by young people. Also, it was ignited by social media. So we see a very interesting trend now on the continent of young people participating on a large scale in politics.
We saw something similar even before Senegal in Malawi. That brought in Lazarus Chakwera. I mean, there's a lot of talk about youth support. But the one thing that has stood out so far is the dearth of data supporting, this youth-driven trend that we're talking about of making changes. Do you agree that young people also played a part then in that election? If yes, there are no supporting data, actually. We just have the stories that we have. But where I'm going with this is, looking at the countries that have had elections so far, how can we harness this enthusiasm that's coming up among young people for future elections? And not just election, more political engagement.
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to move with the times. We live in the 21st century. Therefore, we need to explore the avenues that we have. One of them is social media. Yes, social media does have strong points, but also it does have gaps. One of the strong points of social media is that you can be able to reach a wider audience at once, quickly. But of course, one of the gaps is that sometimes it can be used as a platform for propaganda. There is a lot of fake news on social media, but also I think it is a platform to advance mobilization So I think it is an avenue that we need to explore in terms of deepening democracy. But also, I think political education is extremely important. So I'm saying we need to use the traditional approaches of mobilization, going to rallies, but at the same time, we have to be mindful of the fact that we live in the 21st century and we have to move with the times.
All right, I'll come back to you, Prof. But Mr. Elvis, writing off what he said about social media, I want your perspective on how we can harness this enthusiasm that we see, this trend that we're talking about among youths in shaping discourse in Africa. But I also wanted you to, I want you rather, to look at the concerns that was raised at some point. We know that during this period, harnessing social media for change, governments, sometimes they shut down the internet. I can't remember the country now, but I know that this happened not too long ago. How worried are you that this tool that young people are using might be, broken before they truly maximize it, and what can be done to stop that or mitigate it?
I think for me, in our advocacy, I think it's time we advocate for reforms that mostly in African countries where no country have the right to shut down social media, and therefore whatever reason. Because I know oftentimes it's mostly during elections. For me, I believe our generation is blessed with this tool of our time, which is the social media. We have influencers who come to either be for or against particular candidate. But oftentimes, if you use Nigeria, the last general election in Nigeria, I find out that social media was a tool in which people were able to engage, select, and market whoever they wanted people to vote for. And should we, another thing I noticed that is key is if we have segments of young people in different states, and we're able to, collaborate, bring out, maybe have a group where we'll bring out a particular message in cohesion, I think we'll get it right ahead of the next election. Therefore, one other thing for me too that I believe we should amplify is the need for political parties to reduce. There should be a political party that, does not subscribe to money, because oftentimes, why most young people with character capacity and competence don't really come out to contest elections is because of this deep pocket politics that is going on across Africa, mostly in Nigeria. But ahead of the next election, I'm looking forward to, young people seeing themselves as mirrors of themselves, coming out en masse and, determining a particular candidate they want to vote for.
All right, I'll stay with you, too, and just, I want to ask that same question of the Prof. How do we ensure that social media, that is now a major tool for youth mobilization, is not seized or access to it denied during elections, before we move on?
Yeah, first of all, I don't accept the argument that social media is a security threat. I mean, I understand that there have been some political engagements on social media calling for regime changes, which is quite unfortunate if people come into power not via democratic means. But then when people are engaging in political discourses on social media, you cannot frame that as a security threat. It's not a security threat, So I think these things, they differ from country to country, but there must be control measures. Maybe parliaments in different countries should make sure that they hold the executive institutions of those countries, meaning that, people are part of the cabinet who make these political decisions. They must be held accountable, but also multilateral institutions like, regional bodies, even the AU, they must intervene when they can see that there are human rights violations. Because if you violate the right of people to express their views, you are basically undemocratic, and that must not be allowed, because freedom of expression is the lifeblood of a democracy.
Okay. I want to stay with you. I'm curious, though, as to what happened in South Africa during the election. We know now that there is a coalition government in South Africa, and that happened because the ANC could not get a majority to run government at the time. Has that momentum been sustained, and what were some of the drivers for South Africa?
Well, there are two things, in my opinion, that give rise to coalition arrangements. The first one is lack of majoritarianism. The second one is a political environment that is fragmented. So one-party dominance is a thing of the past, because the hegemony of the ANC has been weakened. The romanticism of the past, the glorification of history, and the preservation of a tradition, I think those are the things of the past. People have not been voting for the ANC because of a good track record of the ANC to get the job done. People have been voting for the ANC largely because the ANC is a liberation movement. But the ANC fell short of improving the lives of the people for the better. I am not saying that nothing changed since 1994 when the ANC came into power, but trust me, the ANC could have done better. But what we have seen is corruption on a large scale, people giving businesses to those of their own in government, and those things have made people to be angry and not to vote for the ANC. And it looks like coalition formations are the future, and unfortunately, I don't think that the ANC is going to improve its electoral performance. I think the ANC will be weakened because I don't think they are prepared to make a change for the better.
I was looking more to the youth angle. Was there any role played by the young people in what we found in South Africa? And is that momentum sustaining?
So, in a few well-chosen words, yes, there was a role played by young people, because you must remember, the majority of eligible voters, it's young people. So young people normally, they have two options. One, to vote. Some of them, they don't register, they don't vote because they are discontent about the way things are, because unemployment in the main affects them because the economy has not been growing the way it should have, and it affects them. So some of them, they stay away from the polls. Others, they vote, but they don't vote for the ruling party because they can see that the majority of members of the ruling party, and not all of them, they are not into promoting development. So the role of young people has changed the political dynamics in the country, and it will continue doing that.
Mr. Elvis, talk to us about, again, it goes back to my earlier question about priorities for the young people in 2023. Do we still have a scenario where young people are being used as tool during election, despite the enlightenment that we seem to have now? They still play the game put together by political players that has been in power for a while. What is your thinking on this, particularly as it affects Nigeria?
Okay, so one thing I've noticed is the political players, they've used poverty as a weapon. And once you're poor, you become vulnerable. A handful of young people, they are vulnerable at the moment. And it's now every passing year, price of things skyrockets, opportunities diminishes. It's either you will have the right surname or you live in an Ibro area to access opportunities that should ordinarily come to you. There is a high cost of unemployment, which has bettered insecurity. So what thing I know is that if you see young people always gravitating to same persons, same people who kept us where we are, not because they really want to, but because because of lack of finance, opportunity, this survival mode. They need to survive. But another thing again is sometimes I try to use myself as an example. If you want to change a situation, you have to be in it. You can't change something from outside. So sometimes you see people, or some young people, they are involved, they are gradually metamorphosing to get to a position where they can change the dynamics. That's why you see cases where some persons just, get elected. You find out that they're doing things differently from why they were kept there, because they really want to do the right thing, because why they were elected, either by either being a governor, a local government chairman. We've seen cases too why, if I want to use Nigeria as an example, we've seen cases too where young people were elected, they did very, very well. And sometimes the people that put them forward were persons who didn't do very, very well. Okay. So across board, I believe young people need to sit down, dialogue, collaborate, make sure ethnicity is not a barrier.
All right.
And for me, that's the only tool we can use, changing the dynamics of our country.
Gentlemen, thank you so far for this conversation. When we come back, we're going to try and explore how we can reduce the impact of economic consideration among young people in pushing for democratic change. And of course, we're also going to take on, expectations for the elections that are still expected in 2025. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. You're still watching One Slot, and we're looking at what the young people have been doing, the shifts they've been bringing to the political space, improving our democracy, and showing incumbents that it's not easy to stick to power if you're not doing the right thing. Before the break, we had Akpobi Elvis and Professor Breakfast, as well as Professor Breakfast. For now, we have him, and then we have joining into the conversation Bonga Abdala. He is joining us from Maputo, a political scientist. Glad you could make it for this conversation. Mr. Elvis is no longer with us for this conversation. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Let me start with you, Mr. Abdala. You're just joining in. I don't know if you've been following the discussion so far, but I'd just like to start with establishing your thoughts on this seeming shifts, young people becoming more active in the political scene in the last few years. We just had the election in Gabon. Before that, we had Senegal. Before Senegal, we had Malawi. And we've had this conversation going on. Do you agree that the youths are becoming more active, and where do you see this trend going?
Thank you for joining this conversation. I definitely agree that young people are now the one that are saving democracy. What we have been witnessing in these last decades is that democracy in Africa is backsliding. And over 50% of population around the world in in African countries are living under a kind of autocratic regimes. So the young people now are the ones that probably will save these democratic trends. But there is one kind of a phenomenon that we are witnessing in African countries, is that although we are having elections, general elections, unicameral, presidential and legislative elections, we are witnessing a situation that the incumbents are trying to manipulate the democratic institutions, electoral commission, the courts, the government. Many institutions are being manipulated in a sense that they must remain, that they probably want to remain in power, but this is a situation that is mostly described by one of the political scientists, Adebawin and Obader, that it's a kind of abrogation of the electorate. So, however, even though young people are trying to save democracy, we still have to fight in a sense that we can overcome this phenomenon that is called the abrogation of the electorate, which means that even though we go to the electoral process, there is a kind of situation that these institutions don't most of the times deliver the credibility of the elections. So in Mozambique, for example, we had elections last year on 19 October, we had elections, and those elections have provoked a lot of demonstrations. That we had most of the young people that were in the demonstrations. Over 100 people died during the demonstrations, in a sense that they wanted to save democracy. They wanted to at least bring up these institutions to become credible in order to save the democratic landscape in Africa.
You talked about fight that the young people need to put up. Can you speak to us about this? What exactly will this fight look like for the young people to try and establish stronger institutions, not just for elections, but for governance?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, is that most of the African ruling parties are now facing a phenomenon which I could call the crisis of legitimacy, which means that these ruling parties are no longer the ones that are trusted because they don't deliver the basic service goods for their own citizens. For example, there has been a lot of dissatisfaction in the youth, claiming for changes in a situation of employment, health and education. Most of the basic services that now they are failing to be delivered by the ruling parties. So now all these ruling parties, I should say almost all, they are facing this crisis of legitimacy. So now is the time that the political institutions, the governance, the good governance, all the principles of the good governance, accountability, transparency, and all of them must be taken into the account so that the youth can bring about some changes, and even the political institutions, they must become very much stronger if they deliver this. So this is...
I'm sorry to interject. I thought you'd landed. But let's bring Prof in now. He's been quiet for a bit, but I needed to, let Abdala speak since he's just joining us. Prof, before the break, we talked about how economic consideration influence some decision by young people, especially when it comes to election. Yes, the charge is for better governance. When infrastructure and employment is there, young people might not be manipulated. But is it possible for us to look towards more of ideological change to discourage, economic consideration when we have elections?
Well, I think it was Frantz Fanon who once said, each and every generation has its own agenda to betray it or to fulfill it. So I think the agenda of young people on a global scale, actually, not only on the continent, is economic development. Because it's one thing to have the instruments of democracy like elections, freedom of expression, the role of the media, this and that. And it's another thing to make a change for the better for the youth. And there has been little change that has been made for young people. As I said in the beginning, that if you look at unemployment on the continent, in the main, it affects young people. So I think young people have been demanding for changes, in their own countries. The issue of ideology, of course, is important. We can't talk politics and not talk ideology. Life is political. And because life is political, life is also ideological, because the issue of ideology is the issue of your worldview, how you view the world. So young people, when they demand a change for the better, they look at change through certain lenses, and that is an ideological matter. So if you want to disrupt the economic order. You want to change the power dynamics between the haves and the have-nots. That becomes an ideological matter.
What are your expectations for the upcoming elections in the countries I mentioned earlier, Ivory Coast, Malawi, Central African Republic, Tanzania, and Cameroon? Will this trend of youth-centered shifts continue, or it will be more of a struggle? Prof, my question is for you.
Well, yes, I think the trend is going to continue. I think young people are going to build upon what they have done, though I think there are some factors which are making young people not to participate the way they should have. Like, for instance, in some countries, and I'm not being narrow-minded, like countries like South Africa, you have a lot of political parties. You have a shopping list of political parties. That tends to lead to political uncertainty, which means that it tends to confuse young people. So I think the pool maybe needs to be narrowed, but I can bet my bottom dollar that on a large scale, young people are going to build upon what they have done because they've got nothing to lose, but they have everything to gain. They are the ones that need to sustain democratic institutions, because if young people don't take democracy seriously, they are going to suffer in future, and also those who will come after them will suffer in a big way. Therefore, they have no choice but to be involved in a democracy.
Mr. Abdala, you shared some concern about how effective young participation has been. There is some, you concede, but more needs to be done. To encourage that, what role do you see for civil society, the media, and perhaps international organizations to support youth engagement and youth-led initiative that will improve on our democratic governance? Mr. Elvis,
well,
Mr. Abdala, I beg your pardon.
Okay, yes. I remember once Alex de Tocqueville has once said that for democracy to survive, we all need to be vigilant. So young people are now becoming so much vigilant. They are now demanding for good services. They are now demanding for the good governance. They are now demanding for good health and education services. So these some of the ingredients that they can bring up the democratic institutions to function very well. As I've mentioned it earlier, most of the African countries now, we are having these trends of elections, but we are suffering from authoritarianism. So it's a kind of a hybrid regimes. All these countries have not consolidated to a situation of liberal democracies. We are witnessing elections which are called like procedural elections, but they lack for minimum substance ingredients so that these democratic elections can bring, strong institutions, can give credibility to young people and all of those. We are talking about the right of speech, right of freedom of thinking. All these situations we are now waiting to see into this kind of situation. There is one thing that now is going on. Although we are having this kind of democratic elections in all these countries, we are witnessing a kind of a phenomenon also that is an innovative manipulation, an innovative autocratic menu that most ruling parties that are bringing in order to co-opt the young people, in order to give some opportunities in the situation of clientelism and patronage. So they are kind of young people that also will save democracy, will demand for strong institutions. But on the other hand, we are witnessing some kind of young people that are trying to perpetuate these regimes, these situation of clientelism and patronage.
Mr. Abdala, there will always be a Judas or more Judas wherever you go, whatever area you are, young or old. We have to rise despite their existence and perhaps bring them to the good side. What is the place of political education in all of this? I'm staying with you, Mr. Abdala. How important is it for young people to educate themselves on issues so that, when we have political conversations like this, it will be issues-based and not sentiment?
Well, education is the most fundamental, instrument for all the countries, not only in a situation of political realm, but also in all the dimensions of the country, economic, social, cultural. So unless we have a good education, unless we have all infrastructure that deliver these services of education, no country, in my concerning, can develop. No country can bring good governance, and no young people, not anyone can demand good services. So education is the most important instrument that must come up with the agenda of the ruling parties or in the governance itself. So we can see, for example, in Mozambique. So in Mozambique, we are now having a situation that, for example, 60% of people are illiterate people. So in a context of authoritarianism, a regime that does not bring strong institutions, does not come up with accountability. So it's much difficult to make some demanding issues in order to change, in order to come up with good services, unless the education is too bad. Because people who don't have education can difficultly understand what are the real demanding and how to afford it, what are the main institutions that they can go through in order to come up with this demanding, substantial services that are supposed to be delivered in their countries.
Prof, let's look ahead. The future of democracy in Africa, how optimistic are you that we will have that? Because in recent times, we're having military come in, take over, even in young countries. And what would be the role of young people, young voters, in shaping it?
I think for democracy to become the only game in town, I think multilateral institutions like AU and other regional bodies, they also need to be vigilant in terms of intercepting threats, and on humanitarian grounds, I think they should intervene when there are violations of human rights, when people come into power, not via democratic means, but via coup d'etats. I don't think that as Africans we should stand for that. There is no justification for that, because democracy is nothing else but government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Therefore, you cannot come into power and purport to be doing that on behalf of the people, but you don't carry the mandate of the people. But the problem has been that the AU in particular, and I'm not scared to say this in public, liberation movements in the AU, they've tended to pledge allegiance to each other, largely because they were together in the trenches, but also because they want to hold on to power a bit longer where they are. They tend to support each other and not speak against each other when one of their own is doing something that is out of line.
I am also not afraid to agree with you that we do have a problem with the AU. On that premise, I was going to ask Mr. Abdala the same question, but what you've said, I think, is worth exploring. Regional bodies, AU particularly, what hope do you have that this organ will step up in helping a democratic consolidation across the continent? Mr. Abdala?
Yes, in my concerning, I think Maurice Makumba, African philosopher, I can agree with him when he says that most of the African problems must be seen from within, and the solutions must be brought within their countries. Concerning their many circumstances, political, economic, social, cultural circumstances that must be come up into their discussion and bring a solution to their own countries. I don't so much agree that the EU can bring solution to African countries, because if we see back in the days in 70s, we have seen a situation that came out.
Mr. Abdala, I'm looking at, do you think they can step up at all? If not, then why are they here? Can they step up? Currently, I mean, they are performing below expectation. Everyone agrees on that. But can they step up? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think it is possible. It is possible, but as I say, the problems of Mozambique, or not of Mozambique, but in Africa, the solutions must be seen from within. And of course, they have been doing a good job in order to help us to head away our own institutions, our own democratic landscape. But most of the challenge must be seen from our ruling parties at this moment, that must also accept that democracy, as my colleague has just said, is the only game in town, and only becomes consolidated when everybody trusts in their own institutions.
Mr. Bonga Abdala, thank you very much for speaking with us. And of course, Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast, it's been a pleasure having you on one slot. We thank you for your time. Earlier we had Akpobi Elvis. He's the Executive Director, Not Too Young to Lead Initiative. He joined us from Abuja. Thank you so much for the gift of your time. And that's our program today. We appreciate the company. Please share your thoughts on issues discussed using any of our social media handles at News Central TV. Until next time, please be well.